Okay. Hi everyone. Welcome. This is another AerOx event of the term, and we're really happy and really excited to be welcoming Alyssa Carson, who's on call with us here today, tonight, depending on where you are. I'm just gonna give a quick intro to Alyssa, and then she's gonna talk a bit more about herself, and then we're just gonna move on to directly to Q&A. If you have any questions, make sure you tweet us, or you can comment in the YouTube chat box below, or you can ask us questions directly through our Facebook page or email even, and we'll be sure to get them on board. So Alyssa's here with me. She's one of the world's youngest astronaut in training. She's currently training with the Possum Academy, and she's also a global speaker, future Mars walker, established brand ambassador, and she's also a published author, and she's only 19. I love that. Alyssa's list of accomplishments include witnessing 3 space shuttle launches, attending space camp 7 times, Space Academy, Robotics Academy, and she's the youngest to graduate ever from the Advanced Space Academy. In 2012 and 2013, she furthered her education at Space Camp Turkey and Space Camp Canada, becoming the world's first person to attend all 3 of NASA's space. And then she also completed the NASA Passport program, visiting all 14 of NASA's visitor centers. Yeah, and now she's currently studying at the FIT. So we're excited to be talking about that as well in a bit. So Alyssa, is there anything you want to add before we start and give it a go?
Yeah, I mean, not too much else. I mean, I've basically just been passionate about space ever since I was a little girl. So really just doing the most that I can to build a strong resume to eventually apply to become an astronaut in the future. So that's really the ultimate goal. And a lot of the different things I've done directly with Project Possum have been really amazing and has really progressed from, I guess, like kind of like the camps to really like real life research, which has been a really amazing transition to be able to do crazy things like microgravity flights and water survival training and all, I guess, the more intense stuff. So that's been really awesome.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, so we're just gonna dive straight into it. First of all, I want to say I love the enthusiasm, because here we're stuck in the UK and everybody's just like, completely dead, like, trying to phase out of life. And you're out here with the American energy we need right now, even with today's current political situation. Okay, so I'm gonna go straight on into the questions and ask you if you could just, like, in your own words, I guess in more of like a science communication way, can you explain to others on the call right now what is astrobiology? Because we don't really know what this is. I mean, I know what it is, but could you explain how would you explain it?
Yeah, I would definitely describe astrobiology as a degree that's pretty similar to astrophysics, but a bit broader. I feel that astrophysics really hones in on physics, whereas astrobiology kind of keeps you more spread out across all the different sciences. So just kind of let you guys know, my curriculum is basically every bio, every physics, every chemistry, every math, and that's about it. and then you get to graduate. So it is pretty intensive on the sciences, I will say that. But I think kind of the really amazing part about astrobiology, I think when people hear astrobiology, they think like aliens because like bio in space. But it actually is so much more than that. Basically, astrobiology can really relate to any sort of science in space, pretty much. Since you study so many different sciences, you can really work in any sort of science in space. So that could be being in charge of some sort of scientific payload going to space. You could study bacteria in space, plants in space. You could even go as far as to studying entire planets. Like this planet in this solar system looks habitable. Let's study that one. So that to me is really the really interesting part about astrobiology, and something that really fascinates me is that throughout your career you can go from tiny bacteria to entire planets and kind of jump all around. So that was something that kind of drew me into wanting to do astrobiology originally, but also at the same time I think for my goals in the future, I think astrobiology will be pretty important for something like a mission to Mars. Obviously, it's like some of the research that we would be doing that's kind of related to astrobiology, looking for signs of bacterial life in the water that's on Mars, testing soil samples, studying the atmosphere, all of that kind of relates. And then at the same time, I wanted a degree that was kind of pretty like well versed. I didn't want to just just study physics and then we get to Mars and we have to do a biology experiment. And I'm like, well, I only know physics. So I wanted to be kind of well versed across all sciences.
I love that. Okay, talk about well-roundedness. It's actually perfect you asked this. Oh, you said this because I wanted to ask you. You obviously seem like, I mean, I'm pretty sure you are an overachiever by the definition of your generation, our generation, whatever generation. And I wanted to ask you how you found do you ever find it challenging to balance like such a strong professional slash your student life with like all your extracurricular extracurriculars, all the camps you have to do, but also like if you have any free time to like socialize and like build not even a network, but have a few friends around you and enjoy just free time around yourself. So how do you find that challenging balancing everything or?
Yeah, it definitely is a huge balance, and it definitely has been something that I have been, I guess the balance has started ever since I was younger, because I mean, when I was younger, I was like going to camps or starting to get into speaking a little bit. And so I started having to figure out that balance pretty early.
Yeah.
And, I think my dad was also really helpful, and especially when I was younger, and kind of helping with that balance. There's been many times that I remember I had to speak at some events, but then I had a dance that night. So my dad was like speeding, I didn't say that, but down the interstate to like get to like someone's house. And I was like changing into my outfit in the car and like doing my makeup in the car. And then I like showed up at like whoever's house, and I was like, okay, let's go. Like, so there's definitely been a lot of times like that where, we really put in, effort to keep the balance and make sure that I'm able to do the stuff that I want to do. I mean, of course, there was little things, I guess, growing up that I missed, but it was never anything too big. If there was something that I really, really wanted to go to,
Yeah.
we would make it work. So I think that was really the biggest part about the balance, was just really figuring out like what I felt was most important, or like
Yeah.
what I really wanted to do. I mean, if it was like some like school carnival thing, I'd rather go and do something like beneficial towards my career, or anything like that. So it was really just kind of balancing what I felt was like most important when.
I hope you have time to sleep. Or are you sleeping enough hours, Alyssa?
I
I
sleep
take
so
very
much. You guys don't even know. I sleep so much.
okay, good. I just wanted to confirm that, guys. Make sure you get your sleep patterns in. Okay, so I read that you already had plans to do a master's and B like a PhD. Obviously, I mean, people don't know that, but you said you wanted to do your master's in the is it the French Institute of Space, the
It's called International Space University, but yes,
International
it's
Space
located
University.
in Strasbourg.
So that's great. Do you have, I know it's going to sound really early and stuff, but your audience right now today, a lot of them are PhD students. And do you already have plans as to what, now that you've done like 1 year of undergrad, do you have some kind of idea of what you want to do your PhD in, what you think will be relevant to being an astronaut, and where would you, consider yourself doing it?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm pretty confident in like my plans for my master's. I do kind of like have those plans pre-set out. So the PhD is actually where I'm still figuring things out a bit.
Mhm.
I'm still deciding if I want to pursue. I mean, I feel like I kind of will. I think it really just depends on like how tired of education I guess I feel after my master's. But basically, I have to get a master's because to apply to the astronaut selection process, you have to have at least a master's in STEM related fields. And
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I would prefer to get a master's anyway, regardless of that rule. I kind of already planned on that. And then, of course, a PhD would be useful in the selection process. But I feel like if I were to continue to pursue a PhD, I would try to tie it back somehow to astrobiology in some way, because
Okay.
kind of my master's is going to kind of drive a little away from astrobiology, just because International Space University, they only have like 2 programs. And so it's not like a whole bunch of different like majors to pick from and things like that. So I feel like with my PhD, I'm going to want to like bring it back to astrobiology. And given like where that's going to be, astrobiology is kind of a weird thing to find sometimes. So I guess really just like finding a program for it.
I love that. I find it so inspiring that you have this whole life plan going on for you, especially in terms of academia. Because I mean, a lot of us have just chosen PhD by default sometimes, or it's something that we just like stumbled upon. But you have a clear like vision. Um, I'm personally a very stern believer of like how efficient and productive people are when there's a lot of interdisciplinarity involved, especially when it comes to mixing more STEM related subjects and like more creative subjects. And obviously, I wanted to ask you how you found it juggling like a career in STEM or like being a student in STEM and like all your brand ambassadorships and stuff that's way more creative, even like shooting commercial stuff. I just want to know your thoughts on this because I know in the audience right now there are a lot of people who are very much like we need to all be well-rounded and all be very good at the more creative and the more scientific side of things. So yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I definitely do feel like, as far as like my education side, all my classes, they are very STEM. Almost all of them. I think the only thing that isn't STEM that I take is like a few like forced English classes or a few like forced humanities courses. But besides that, yeah, it doesn't really stray too much from the STEM side. So kind of like you were saying, I feel like a lot of the really awesome like opportunities I've gotten to do have been really cool. Like, yeah, I guess creative outlets, whether that is fun with clothes or fun with, whatever they're working on, whether that's with the makeup or whatever. So that's been a really cool outlet to kind of play around with, I guess, like the creative side of space. And honestly, dealing with different brands and stuff like that has been really amazing just because, in my opinion, I think that nothing really happens in space without public interest. I think that
Mm,
if we want to get to Mars, the public has to be excited to see us get to Mars. And so I think that having brands interested in showcasing space is, the next step into like getting to that point where the public is ready to see us go to Mars. And so being able to kind of like help with that in a sense and yeah, try to make space look cool and try to make space look fun. And it has been really cool to kind of like work with them and like talk through
yeah.
different ideas. So yeah, it's been really cool to be able to have that and kind of have that as like still talking about space, which of course is STEM, but being able to do it in a different way has been really awesome.
Cool. And here you guys have it, the most perfect, well-rounded person in the universe. I love that. And actually, I want to ask you a slightly more controversial question, I guess, which kind of goes against what we've just been talking about. Do you feel like there is ever like an oversaturation of the number of role models in the space industry, especially with regards to like the number of astronauts that are in the spotlight versus like the teams that are behind the astronauts, helping them and training them in a way, educating them? Do you feel like we're reaching a point where there are too many astronauts in a way, and or do you feel like you're the new frontier of like influencer for your generation who should be pushing forward for more publicity and more marketing? Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it definitely is really interesting. Obviously, there are tens of thousands of people that work to send one astronaut into space. There are so many people that have a hand in that, and it's really incredible. And that's honestly what I love so much about visiting different NASA facilities, or not even just NASA, but private sector companies, and
Mm,
seeing the hundreds of people there. And if you speak to them, you can feel their passion for what they're doing. And I think that's really the incredible side about space is how many people are there, passionate about what they're doing, all towards a common goal of, sending this one person to space. And, I do think in terms of like astronauts and I guess their publicity side, it really kind of changes a lot. I think that, it wasn't too long ago that the NASA administrator was saying that he didn't feel that kids wanted to be astronauts anymore. He felt that there was like a lack of, kids saying that or a lack of kids, addressing that.
mhm.
Um, and then from my standpoint, all I hear is kids wanting to become astronauts. And so I do think that um, there is kind of a shift happening, I guess, in a sense of. I think the idea of becoming an astronaut is very intimidating to so many people because it just feels so unrealistic. So, I mean, I do think that it is important that we continue to push space to be something that is more understood, I guess, by the general public, because that's really what got me into speaking in the first place was
Mhm.
because when the space shuttle program ended, I had so many people, whether it was the general public or even family, like space is closed, NASA's closed, there aren't astronauts anymore. And so there definitely is such this lack that I found between what's actually going on in space and what people think are going on into space.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily think it is necessarily like too many astronauts. I think it's just the way we go about teaching and possibly do a better job, honestly, at just like teaching, as many people as we can about what's going on in space. For me, when the space shuttle program ended, it was constantly like, actually, there's plans of going to Mars. It is far away, but we have to build this new rocket, and it's called this, and this new capsule. And, I think that's important because, there becomes that gap where people are misunderstood by like the benefits of going to space. You know, why are we doing it in the first place? And if they don't have an understanding of what we're doing to begin with, then they're never going to understand why we're doing it. And so that's always the importance of, I think, science communicators. And there's so many science communicators that aren't astronauts, you know, engineers. You know, I can name so many other, you know, large creators who are pretty strong and inspiring kids. I think there are tens of thousands of jobs to fill. So if we just continue to inspire those kids now, then we'll continue to pursue great things in space.
Great, thank you. We're just gonna get someone in to ask a quick question. They submitted a question beforehand and they wanted to ask you in person. So I'm gonna let them in now.
Sure.
Hopefully it will work. And yes, so Ren, can you hear us? Hi. Bear in mind with us. Sorry guys, there was no pre-warning of this. Yes, so Ren, can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me as well?
Yeah. If you would like, you can ask your questions to Alyssa now. I think there's a bit of a delay, but please ask the question to Alyssa.
Perfect. First of all, thank you for the talk, Alyssa, and for being on this call. It's really interesting to hear someone as young as you and also a female talking about things concerning space, because for me, it's always been a very unknown era. And I wanted to ask a question that you touched upon very briefly. My question to you would be, and it might be a very broad question, so forgive me, but my question to you would be, what would you think is the benefit to humanity on Earth for us investing in going to space and, you know, setting up on a different planet when, you know, there's a lot of things that we can do to help our current planet and humanity as well?
Yeah, totally. I think that is probably one of like the largest, I guess, misconceptions of space is the idea of us like throwing money in a rocket ship and then just sending it into space and never seeing it again. And I think that looking at space from the outside, that's really what you see. You see us putting millions of dollars into a rocket, it's sent to space, and we never get to touch that again. And so I think that it's really important to realize all the benefits that we do actually get from space. So just kind of like start off basically is just the technology that we gain. So there are so many inventions that we all use every single day that was either invented for the space program or by the space program. Most of the technologies in our cell phone we wouldn't have without the space program. You know, me and my dad joke around all the time if NASA had put a sticker on every single item that they had created that was either created for them or by them, we would literally have NASA stickers everywhere. So that's kind of the first thing, and especially with something like a mission to Mars, you know, it's pushing us to do something out of our comfort zone and something new, and that requires new technology and new inventions, which can then be marketed to either help a problem that we have here on Earth that we may not have thought of. So, I mean, for example, with the mission to Mars, we've now invented plasma engines that possibly now we can have planes go faster, or you know, things like that. And it's possible they could be more better for the environment here. So possibly we can change those plane engines to be better for us here. And so as we're continuing to do those things, those items, those technologies, those ideas are then used back here on Earth. Again, there's just in general kind of like the science of it, you know, all the different scientific research that we gain, of course. And then in general with Mars specifically that we're looking at is by going to Mars, we're really trying to get an understanding of what is possible. You know, can we colonize Mars? Can we terraform Mars? And yeah, it may feel like, you know, that we're just ditching Earth, but in a lot of ways we aren't. So looking at Mars, are there resources on Mars that we could use back here on Earth that could kind of help areas that need those resources? Or is it possible that as population continues to grow, it would be helpful to have Mars as a second place so we aren't overpopulating Earth, and that we would almost give Earth a break in a way because now we're splitting our population between two planets? Is that idea possible? And so in those ways, we are really seeing the potential that we have to Mars and how that can benefit here on Earth. And again, it's like that many different aspects of space, whether that is mining the moon for resources to kind of help with more sustainable energy here, or those sorts of aspects. So it kind of all connects in a way, and kind of the ultimate goal really is, yes, we do have problems here, but eventually the sun is going to burn out. Eventually the Earth will no longer exist. Of course, that is millions and millions of years from now, but basically everything here eventually won't be here. And so the idea of space travel is that we need to put ourselves in a place where we are able to eventually travel to another planet. And not saying, of course, Mars is not the ultimate goal. Mars is in the same solar system. If the Earth goes out, so does Mars. So it's not necessarily like saving everyone or anything like that, but it's getting us to that first step where we're understanding, okay, this is how you could move to a new planet and live. And so you have to kind of start building that right now, because we want to be able to be at a point where we're able to almost be like the sci-fi movies and traveling throughout the galaxy and stuff. But yeah, kind of it's all just the start of learning that, and starting that process where we have a greater understanding of how to travel through space, because eventually it will be needed. It says that single planet species will become extinct. So if we just try to stay here forever, it won't work in the long run just because of space.
Great. Thank you. Ren, do you have a follow-up, or is that
No,
okay?
that was a really clear answer. I actually hadn't considered some of the points you raised, so that was a very good answer. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ren. Thank you for coming in. Okay, I'm gonna keep asking you questions, firing away. There's a few other people that want to come on the call or who have asked questions, so we're gonna ask those later. I'm gonna put a bit of a product placement for you there and ask you if what you think is the key difference between the book you wrote, Alyssa, which everyone should check out today, and other similar titles by other astronauts who've also encouraged people to become astronauts. What makes your book stand out?
Yeah, so really like the whole point of me writing a book in the first place was really because I had so many people talking about how they wanted to become astronauts. And to become an astronaut, there is no like bullet point checklist I can just like hand out to everyone, because it is so different for everyone. And I feel like a lot of astronauts, they really explain just their experience, so like what they did, how they did it. But I feel like in a way, if you're looking to become an astronaut, you really need all the perspectives. You don't necessarily, yes, of course, it's really amazing to sit here and listen to that this person did this, they went to the military, they were a fighter jet pilot, they did this. But I think that trying to figure out what to go into to become an astronaut, it's almost like a personal journey that you have to take. First you just have to decide what you're interested in, and there's no way for me to tell you that. It's definitely something that is just really personal for you. So the point of the book was really to first just really have someone who's reading it really understand what it means to become an astronaut. What are the risks you'd be taking by saying that you want to be an astronaut? Realistically, what kind of position are you putting yourself into? And then the second, what steps would you do to do that? So what are some tips? Whether that is starting out in your local area, speaking about your dreams, different opportunities that you can build for yourself, building a resume in that way. And then at the same time, it's full of a bunch of resources just to learn more about space. So yes, of course, it has actually several astronaut books in there that are recommendations. And then, whether it's YouTube channels or websites to look into, or anything to start building your knowledge about space, or directly the career that you chose to go into. So it's meant to be more of like a direct guide. And of course, it bounces off of some of my personal experience in there as well, and like what I've done. But it's to show you kind of a way to go about it, since, it's just something that is so, I guess, different than other careers. It's just so undefined. Whereas, like, if you're interested in, let's say, physics, you're gonna major in physics. It's pretty simple. Whereas, like, being an astronaut is much more broad.
Cool. Thank you for that. So Chris is asking, do you think the moon mission is a necessary step to get to Mars, like the Artemis mission, or should we be focusing on going straight there?
Yeah, that is a really awesome question. Been debated forever now. We've gone back and forth and back and forth, so we're just going to Mars. No, we're going to the moon first. So it is definitely really interesting. I do think that there's benefits kind of in both ways. So, I mean, obviously now the current plan is that we are hopefully going back to the moon in sometime in the 2020s, and then on to Mars in the 2030s. So that's the current plan. I do think that it is a good idea to go back to the moon in the sense of making sure the rocket works, testing the rocket in many ways, saying, okay, we can get to the moon with it, this system works, this, that, and the other, that's all good. I think one of the downsides about possibly like going to the moon, landing there, going off the moon to Mars, that kind of idea that's kind of been bounced off of using the moon as almost like a launch pad. The reason why I think that is almost kind of like a downside is really in space, there are two times where you have the greatest chance of things going wrong, and that is during launch and during landing. While you're in space, there's not a whole lot that's just all of a sudden going to go wrong out of nowhere. But during launch and landing, you have so many different components working at the same time, and so that just causes more room for error. And of course, we've had problems, for example, like Apollo 13, they were in space, things went wrong. So of course that can happen, but there's just less of a chance. And so I think by landing on the moon, taking off from the moon, you're increasing the amount of times that you have that dangerous kind of time of all those components moving at the same time again. And of course, launching from the moon is much easier than launching from Earth, but at the same time, I think that we are increasing the amount of dangerous periods that we have in the mission. So I'm not saying that it's necessarily a bad idea to launch off of the moon. I still think it's something that we're very capable of doing, but I do think that there are ups and downs to both. But I do think having, for example, with the Artemis program, some missions going back to the moon to test the rocket, I think that's amazing to have the rocket used a few times, make sure everything's going well. In space, of course, all we want to do is testing to make sure everything's good for the actual mission. So I do think that all those missions will end up being absolutely amazing.
Thank you for that. We're kind of jumping around everywhere. It's like a lot of questions from asking about very different things. So Rocio, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing, from the Universidad Nacional of San Juan in Argentina, is asking whether when people first land on Mars, whether there will be any measures to protect the environment there, and what are those measures, if you know of?
Really, there are still a whole bunch of different ideas about where we would actually even be, for example, on Mars. So, of course, there's the idea of just having a habitat on the surface, and that, in a sense, is still kind of up for debate, mainly just because Mars has such a thin atmosphere, so we would be exposed to a lot more radiation. So a lot of research that's actually being done right now is actually looking at some of the lava tubes that are on Mars. So there are kind of so there's some, for example, in Iceland, so a lot of the research is being done there, but basically just these formed, almost like cave systems, tube systems, that have now been carved out from previous whatever happenings. And so we have found that there are some of those on Mars as well. So a lot of research is being done is if we were to put the habitat, let's say, under the surface in, let's say, one of these carved out tubes that are hollowed out caves that are on Mars. And then is there a way to actually pressurize a section of them to almost give the astronauts a double barrier? Let's say there's a hole in the habitat, it wouldn't be as detrimental because we would have this section pressurized as well. So there's a whole lot of different ideas going into that about how to add a double layer of security. And as far as preserving the environment of Mars as well. Most of what we're doing, honestly, is going to be surviving from the environment of Mars. So I don't think that there's too much damage, honestly, we will be able to do for the first missions, just because I think we're just going to be terrified of the environment of Mars. I think that I think most of the stuff that we're doing is just going to be collecting a few samples of Mars, and then beyond that, there's really not too much else that we're able to actually do with Mars, even if we wanted to. So the first missions are really just going to be gain an understanding of Mars. Now, looking forward towards the future of the ideas of terraforming Mars and starting changing the actual composition of Mars entirely, that starts to become a whole different topic of figuring out what we would actually do with that and how that would work.
I was it's past my lifetime. I don't need to know. Think about this. Right. Okay. I'm gonna jump in and ask you a question from the YouTube section. Geeta is asking, can you tell us about the fitness and diet requirements for being an astronaut? Have you started undertaking any program, any training? Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of like fitness, so obviously there are like a few, I guess, restraints towards becoming astronauts. There are height requirements, there are vision requirements, those little things that come into play. Actually, something that I thought was pretty interesting because I think a lot of people get scared of being an astronaut based on the vision requirement. I think that's something that a lot of people jump
Oh,
to,
oh
just
yeah,
because so many people have glasses and they're like, oh, I have glasses, I can't be an astronaut. So like with the vision requirements of it, it's either 2020 or corrected 2020. And something that I thought was pretty interesting on the SpaceX launch not too long ago over the summer, if anyone had noticed, but one of the astronauts was sitting there and he had his eyeglasses on the entire time. He was sitting in the rocket, he had his eyeglasses on, touching the touch screen, and he closed his helmet, still had his eyeglasses on. And I thought that was really, really interesting to see how we've kind of progressed in that. But as far as like the physical requirements, so you, in the astronaut selection process, you do have to pass a physical exam. And basically there isn't necessarily anything like I haven't directly trained specifically for the physical exam. I mean, I think when I'm to the point where I'm looking at applying, I will be much more rigorous in making sure I'm in as best shape as I can to pass the physical. But I mean, for right now, my goal is to stay just kind of in relatively good health, to make sure I'm able to actually do that in the future. But there's nothing like training, I guess you could say, that I've necessarily gone through.
Great, thank you. I have a question. Have you ever considered or thought of your life after you travel to space and when you do come back, if you do come back? Oh, that sounds so ominous. In the event that you do come back, Alyssa, please, do you think you'll like change career path? Do you think you'll be like more of a role model and like go around the world and talk about your experiences? What do you think will happen?
Yeah, so if all goes as planned and I were to go to Mars and come back and things like that, I would actually most likely retire from the astronaut corps. As weird as that sounds, actually retiring after one mission, but with the mission to Mars being as long as it is
Mhm.
so much, I'm not gonna say damage, but kind of damage to your body and your muscles getting weaker, your bones losing density. There are issues that being in space causes to the body, and it causes us to have kind of a recovery time. And
Yeah.
the more time you're spent in space, the harder the recovery time is. And so, of course, with the mission to Mars, being on Mars is going to be much better than just being in space because Mars has much more gravity. So exercise is going to be much more. It will work a little bit better just because we're actually having force and we're using our muscles and our bones more. But still, it is going to be a change going from Martian gravity to zero gravity to Earth gravity. And so all of those changes do kind of require, anyway, changes and the need for recovery. And so after the mission to Mars, I wouldn't necessarily want to go back. I probably want to go back to space, but I wouldn't necessarily want to push it and go back to space and then have more damage to my muscles and my bones and that sort of thing. And so that would probably be the end of me going to space. But beyond that, I would probably want to either continue helping with some of the research. So whether that's us bringing back rock samples and me trying to help in any sort of that aspect. And then I'll probably also like continue speaking once I come back, just because it's something I've learned to love so much. So it's probably something that I would continue to do when I come back. But yeah, probably no more space travel after that.
Yay, more speaking. We love high-profile speakers. Okay, Chris is asking a spicy question. First of all, a non-spicy question before that. He says, how high do you think the risk of human spaceflight is compared to early Apollo missions? Are we now more risk averse than when we were after the shuttle disasters? And the spicier side of the question is, how do you personally feel about, the risk of your life when launching the rocket? Like, are you afraid, Alyssa?
Yeah, I do think that we've learned so much since Apollo and the shuttle. We are always learning and always building technology that kind of makes the rocket safer in many ways. I also think a lot of the technology that SpaceX has done has been really amazing in terms of the security aspect of the astronauts. I think that's been really awesome to see them grow in that way and them contribute to that. But yeah, I do think that we have progressed a long way since the Apollo program. And as far as like for a mission to Mars or my thoughts on kind of the risk of space, I do think that, of course, there are so many risks with going to space. I think I've kind of gotten used to them or learned more about like the solutions, so it doesn't really seem like as big of a deal.
I
But
love that.
but of course, like launch is probably one of like the scariest aspects of going to space. But I think also for me, in meeting people who work in the space industry, it just kind of like makes me feel like I'm in good hands, just because these are literally the people working on a rocket that I could possibly be on, and seeing how precise and how passionate and how like they're already thinking that like someone's going to be on this, it has to be perfect, and that thing has been really reassuring. I also think in general in space, I think obviously there have been many tragic accidents happen in space, but I do think that for the most part, I think space has had a relatively good track record for the amount of insane stuff that we have done, to be honest. And of course, there have been mishaps along the way and problems that have been solved and things like that. But I do think that that's why it takes so long to build a rocket, because we are thinking of every problem that can go wrong. So yeah, so that's why for the mission to Mars, if you think about it, the rocket that's going to be going to Mars has probably been being built for the past 10 years, but it's finally ready. It'll finally be ready and finally passed all the tests to be as safe as possible. So that's kind of the way I look at it.
Great. I mean, I'm glad you say that, because I mean, I work in commercial aero as well, and people just always fear even flying regular commercial planes, and you're like, just look at the proportion of risk there are to like normal airplanes, and like you driving your car down the road, like it's crazy.
Right.
Anyways, I'm glad you brought that up. I have another question. I read some of your other interviews, and you frequently mentioned that you sometimes were not, especially when you were younger, when you were not basically taken seriously enough, or too serious for the knowledge that you had and the people that were listening to you. So I was wondering if you had any advice to maybe younger people, or even much older people, who face discrimination based on ageism on a regular basis. Like, do you have any, how did you deal with that when people told you they weren't serious about you?
Yeah, it definitely still is something that happens, something that I'm still learning about as well. But it is definitely something that I feel like I have faced a good bit. I mean, for example, like if I meet someone who works in the space industry, I always feel like I'm forced to maybe throw out big words or things like that to prove to them that I'm not just like a kid saying I want to be an astronaut, and then just like something that they're used to. So, for example, I'll like, I've done all sorts of EVA, or like I've done all sorts of spacesuit evaluations with IVA spacesuits, with Final Frontier spacesuit design, and just like try to like make it sound as fancy as possible. And then they're like, oh, like
She knows.
like IVA spacesuits or things like that. And so that has been challenging, and it's been kind of a work in progress, especially since joining Project Possum, because Project Possum has been really amazing. I started it when I was 15. Basically, Project Possum is just a whole bunch of citizen science, so a whole bunch of everyday people who want to contribute to science. So it has been really amazing to join that. However, everyone in there is adults with careers and children and much more established people than me, and so it was definitely a whole lot of catch up in the beginning. Even many of the courses within Project Possum, I remember, keep in mind, I started this when I was 15, so one of the courses I hadn't even taken any sort of calculus yet, and so I remember in one of the classes they were like, okay, let's go back to some high school calculus, and they were talking about some weird, I didn't even know what, talking about literally something to do with the atmosphere. I had no idea what was going on, because I had never taken calculus, and so I was just kind of at a total loss. So I think a lot of the time it is just kind of sometimes realizing that, yes, you do need to ask for help sometimes. You're not going to be up to the knowledge of a lot of these other people, and you just kind of have to realize that. And so having Project Possum was really amazing, to where all of these knowledgeable people were obviously willing to help me and kind of help step me up to a little bit of that level. So that was really amazing. But then at the same time, it definitely still is a challenge in terms of like meeting new people. And honestly, advice for that, I don't know. For me, my go-to is just throwing big words, but I don't know if that's the best way to go about it.
Yeah.
So I'm not too sure.
That's fine. Thank you so much. So Sophia Halbach is asking loads of questions, a lot of them, but one of them specifically asks, how do you think, I don't know if I should be asking this, I will be asking this. She's asking if you think that there will be an American flag put on Mars first, when people do first land on Mars. Do you think that now in our political slash world in the current world political sphere, do you think that that it's still relevant for a single country to, like, race to space or to specific point in space, or do you think it'll be more of an international consortium, an international led project?
Yeah, that's definitely something that yeah, I've been talking about for so long. I definitely think that the mission to Mars should be more of an international mission. Whether that is an American astronaut, cosmonaut, an ESA astronaut. I think for the most part, I just think that so many people in general get hung up on NASA, and honestly, it's kind of frustrating sometimes that when talking about space, so many people only think about NASA, and it's really crazy because I'll have someone, let's say, from France, and they're like, "I want to be an astronaut. How do I get into NASA?" And I'm like, "Why do you want to get into NASA?" I'm like, "ESA is right there. It's much easier. You can be an astronaut with ESA." And so I think to that degree, it kind of gets to where I think that it's important that we do start incorporating more of other space agencies around the world. And it definitely is something that I'm looking to get more into. Actually, I'm going to be starting an internship in the next couple of weeks, which I'm super excited about, with Jacobs, which is a company. They are a NASA contractor as well, but they do all sorts of other things. But a lot of the stuff that I will be helping is a lot of global relations with space agencies all over the world. So
Nice.
I'm really excited to kind of work with that. And basically, we're going to be doing a lot like what space, like, let's say Switzerland is building this kind of satellite, and just, working more as a united front. But I think, I think the space race between US and Russia and going to the moon I think it was a good motivator for us to actually do it. I don't think we would have gone to the moon if we didn't have that. But I think that we are in a place where we are able to go to Mars without that sort of without that
agenda. I'm gonna call it agenda, but yeah.
Yeah, right, with that sort of agenda. Yeah, totally. So I think that we are in a place where we can do that. So yeah, I've always said it. I definitely think it should be an international mission for sure. And then as far as like the flag and all, I mean, if it is an international mission, everyone will bring their respective thing. I would assume, but I guess that's all the logistics that I wouldn't be part of. But I totally agree. I think it should be an international mission, of course.
Thank you. My other overachieving friend Radhika in the comment section is asking, do you feel like we're working to make space exploration more accessible to all backgrounds, including experience, education, age, physical ability, in our case for today, maybe like in terms of gender ratio? And if so, how do you think we can improve accessibility? And also, what's your best advice for those with less experience who desperately want to get involved in space exploration? Like, what should be the first step if you're completely not into this and suddenly people are listening to your interview today and be like, oh my God, I'm so inspired?
Yeah, so starting off with space becoming more accessible, I 1,000% think it's becoming more accessible. I think that there are so many factors in play right now that are going to lead to it being more accessible. I think a big part of that is the private sector of space. I think that is going to be absolutely huge for accessibility in space, especially countries who don't have a space agency whatsoever. Let's say the private sector starts opening their own astronaut selection processes. They may not care what country you come from. They're not going to have the same restrictions as maybe a government agency would. And so let's say your country doesn't have a space agency, but that would still give you the option of becoming an astronaut through the private sector. And so I think that's something that's really interesting, because we are going to be able to have more people becoming astronauts, working in the space industry. Of course, I mean, companies like Virgin Galactic working on space tourism. And that sort of aspect of, tourists going to space, which kind of like a whole different discussion. But I think in general, space is becoming more accessible because we're going to be having so many more people working in it. And so I think more jobs are going to become possible because of that. So I think that's really interesting. And I'm really excited to see the way that progresses, just because, yeah, I do think that's awesome to have more accessibility within the space program, because that's the issue to which why people either don't want want to become astronauts or don't want to pursue a space degree or something related to it is because it feels so far-fetched and it feels so distant from any other career. And so I think that having it more accessible is going to help so much. And then advice towards getting started in it all. I mean, I think honestly, just start by building your knowledge of it. And then I honestly just start in my local area, just trying to learn as much as I could from that. And then, yeah, from there, like venturing beyond that, so much that I have, or so many of the opportunities have honestly just come from talking to people. So whether that is, you know, whatever sort of setting you're in, just really telling people what you're interested in doing. So, for example, Project Possum has been an absolutely amazing opportunity that I've been able to do. And the only reason I even knew about Project Possum was because I was a kid and I went to a camp and I told people that I wanted to become an astronaut. And one of the counselors actually went to the university that Project Possum was starting in. She said, "Hey, you may want to give them a call. I have no idea if you can do it, but maybe it's worth a phone call." And it ended up being more than worth a phone call in the long run. So I would definitely also say just being really, really vocal about what you want to do because you don't know where those opportunities are going to come from. So I think that's another important thing. But yeah, really just being open. I think in general, space, I feel like you can just bounce all over the place within space. So yeah, just kind of be open-minded to kind of bounce all over the place in terms of like different either interests or maybe different companies, things like that.
Great, thank you. And actually, bouncing on exactly what you just said, Chris is also asking a relevant question on the commercialization of space launches and the fact that SpaceX is making it cheaper. And obviously, we have space. I mean, we're going to try to get space tourism a thing now. So, how do you think this will affect the actual job of the astronaut, like with respect to space tourism? And how do you think it will change the image of the astronaut, considering? I mean, I guess you kind of touched upon that a little bit, but if there's anything you want to add, please feel free.
Yeah, I do think that it is going to be pretty interesting. I think it's going to be something that is kind of going to have to be figured out because you kind of have to think like, I think it's going to put in so many people's mind, like, why put in so much hard work to be an astronaut and go to space when there's so many just everyday people just fly into space for fun? And I think that is going to maybe hurt, I guess, the amount of people who want to become astronauts because I feel like so many people, or especially, I mean, kids, they get their interest in wanting to become astronauts because they want to go to space and they want to float around and they want to have a good time. And then eventually, you know, as they get older, they learn a whole lot more about the science and the research and all the other things astronauts do. But I think if people realize that they're able to just go to space, have fun, float around. I think that there may be a lack of people wanting to actually put in the work as well, and especially for kids. As they're growing up, they're going to see it as if they, you know, want to go to space and float around, they're going to want to maybe one day have the goal of going into space as a tourist, rather than currently if a kid wants to go to space, they're going to have the idea of becoming an astronaut. So I think it's going to kind of like shift that view, which I think is going to have like a huge impact as they grow up in terms of like what they want to pursue.
Yeah,
I think that's going to be the most interesting part of introducing space tourism. I think commercial space is going to be really awesome. I think the partnership between the private and the government sector is going to be really important to continue to build. And yeah, but I think the space tourist aspect is going to be the most interesting to see how that plays out.
Hurtful. You heard it here, kids. Alyssa is not a fan of space tourism.
I'm not.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I don't dislike it. I think it's really awesome, but
You're
it's going to be interesting.
JF on YouTube is asking a pretty interesting question that I never thought of. They're asking, how much do you get paid as a qualified astronaut? Which, to be honest, I'm curious to hear. Do you know?
I don't know actually. Let me Google it.
Yeah, this is probably a Google question. Sorry, maybe you need
I
this.
think it's like 100. Oh, yeah. Okay, that's what I was thinking. Okay, so Google says between 66,000 and 160,000. I do think that it changes depending on like I think risk of mission and things like that. But yeah, honestly, I don't really think about it too much. I mean, I know they aren't like the highest paid people on the planet, but I've never really thought about the whole like payment side of being an astronaut, to be honest. That's why I didn't even know the number. I don't know. It's never been something that I really thought about too much. I was just always interested in going to space. But yeah, no, I do know that they weren't like the highest paid people or the highest paying job ever, but it's the most fun job, I would say.
I mean, yeah, it was complete out of the blue, this question, to be honest. Like, I had never thought of it either. Again, I guess maybe it's an incentive for some people to become astronaut if there was a pay rise, I guess. I don't know. Okay, and then Benno on YouTube as well is also asking, how loud does it get when a rocket lifts off, and is it dangerous since you've witnessed a few?
Yes. Yeah, that's a really awesome question. So to kind of give you an idea, for the space shuttle when it launched, if you were within crap, I just realized miles is not going to work here.
Oh, that's fine. We have an international audience. There are some Americans on the
Okay.
We can do the conversion, yeah. Oh, also in the UK, they also use the imperial system. Don't worry, go for it.
Okay. So if you're within 1 mile of the space shuttle, then you would die. Basically, based on like the shock of the rocket being launched. If you are within 2 miles, you would go deaf. So basically, it would be so strong to kind of knock out your eardrums, you would then become deaf. So the closest you can like possibly be is like I think like 3.5. The only people closer than that, there are some firefighters that are underground in a bunker, full on to rush in case something goes wrong. But they are very heavily protected to they're not like 1 mile, they're I think a little past 1 mile underground in the bunker and all to be able to rush in case something does go wrong. But yeah, the closest you can be is like 3.5 miles, and yeah, it's basically just a huge rumble. It's kind of like you see it before you feel it, or sorry, you feel it before you see it, and yeah, it's a pretty cool thing to experience, even with smaller launches as well. I've gotten to see like Maven, which was a satellite that was going to Mars, that sort of launch. I think those are super cool. They're not quite as powerful, but they are pretty cool.
Cool, thank you. And actually, a follow from Chris. How do you know about the technology to protect the astronauts from the sound itself, the astronauts themselves?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know if I don't know if I know all the exact like technology outside of it to like protect the astronauts. I do know that it is like changing. Could be obviously like so basically the capsule part is the aspect that's going to give the most protection for the astronauts. So when that capsule changes, we've evolved through different capsules. Currently we're building a whole new capsule, the Orion capsule, for the missions to Mars. So that's going to have, newer technology with better protection and things like that. Something that I saw, kind of going back again to that SpaceX launch, I was looking at I was analyzing everything because it was so cool that SpaceX was doing their own thing. But yeah, if you saw, they like really did not shake that much. And I thought that was so crazy. If you see during the shuttle, they're like rocking all around and going crazy. But for SpaceX launch, the astronauts were I felt they were very still for considering they were on top of a giant rocket that was taking off. So I do think that the technology is increasing to a point where the astronauts are just insanely comfortable, I guess, to that point.
It's a 5-star trip now.
I know, I guess. Of course there's still like the G-force that's going to be on your body, but yeah, for the most part it's getting so much better.
Great. We're almost at the end. Don't worry. I feel like I've been firing you with questions. I kind of feel bad. I'm like, oh, just want to have a chat. Rand is asking, and I guess it kind of goes back to what we talked about before, but do you have a plan B in case space things don't quite work out, and you decide that you don't like it as much? Maybe when, I don't know, by the time you finish your PhD and you're like, oh, actually research is fun and you want to stay in research forever.
Yeah, of course. I think at least with the idea of becoming an astronaut, you have to have a career before you can become an astronaut as a career. So if you don't get selected as an astronaut, wonderful. You have a very established career in whatever you decided to go into. And so that's kind of the really awesome part about it. And that's also another reason why you do have to be passionate about whatever you're going into first. Because, you know, the astronaut selection process is very tough, very rigorous in terms of like who they select. And anyway, it's just not the easiest thing to get selected for. And so, yeah, you always have to be considering that you just may not be selected. You could have a medical problem that you don't even know you have, and they're like, no, sorry, we can't take that risk, you know? So there's always possibilities like that that can occur. And so, yeah, obviously I have thought about it, and that there's a chance I'm not selected as an astronaut, to which, yeah, I would probably still work in astrobiology. I would probably just try to help out with the mission as much as possible. I still want to contribute to the space program really in any way that I can, from wherever I can, to be honest. So yeah, that would kind of be the plan. I don't really see myself, like, for example, like if I didn't really like have this goal as a kid, I still think I would have totally gone into a STEM career. I can't picture myself doing any sort of like anything besides STEM. I feel like it could have still been space related. I feel like if it wasn't space related, I would still be in some sort of like biology. I don't really see like what else I could have gone into, to be honest.
Great. Well, that's all the questions I have, and apparently the public has on every platform. It was an honor for you to be with us today. I'm glad you're out here inspiring people, because I find that so commanding, because I keep meeting a lot of people who are really successful in what they do, but they don't have the same drive and they don't have the same communication and speaking skills that you have. I think it's something you should really treasure. And I hope that there can be more role models like you, especially for reaching and pushing for the extremes. And hopefully you can also encourage more women in STEM as well by having more profiles like yourselves out in the open. And yeah, is there anything else you want to add? Any last words? Oh my God, that's...
Yeah, I mean, just thank you guys for tuning in and all the amazing questions. And yeah, really just continue to pursue whatever you guys are interested in. Really go after whatever your dreams may be. I know that, you know, for me, when I was 3, saying I wanted to be an astronaut and go to Mars is literally the absolute craziest thing I could have picked. And it is becoming more and more of a reality. So yeah, don't be knocked down if something feels very extreme or impossible, because I do think that so many of those crazy impossible dreams are becoming more of a reality. So really stick with them.
Great, thank you. So yeah, thanks guys for tuning in. We're the Oxford University Aeronautical Society. We actually have an event with ESA astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti next week, so please make sure to tune in on that. But yeah, please, I guess, give a virtual clap to Alyssa Carson today. And yeah, thank you again so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys so much.